Gather around and hear the Gatekeeper's proclamation. Come, come. Welcome to the 16th Annual Washington Green Cemetery Tour, sponsored by the Gunn Library Historical Museum. This cemetery was created in 1849 and is the resting place for many thousands of Washington residents. This is a time of year we honor those who passed before us by hearing their stories. We learn from them. Success, failure, ambition, and sorrow are all part of the living and the dead. This evening you will be introduced to founders and builders of our community. And it's during this time of year, especially during the witching hours, that the barriers between the quick and the dead are the most penetrable. Those whom you will meet tonight have rematerialized, so we may have a richer memory of our community and its long gone members. Please be advised to stay close to your guides. One never knows when the unthinkable might happen. Stay within the path of the luminaria. Do not use flash photo settings. And please do not sit, lean against, or disturb any of the cemetery markers. There are many low grass level markers, so please watch your step. Be mindful of your guides. Good wishes to all of you, and have a safe tour. You may now enter the cemetery.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mary Brinsmade. I was born here in Washington, 1827. I was schooled here and supported by my family. I was one of few young women able to attend college. Being female at the time, we were expected to be of use to the home, raising children, keeping the house, and being the amusement of a husband. I thought otherwise. I strongly believe that education is of equal importance to a woman as a man. So upon my graduation from Mount Holyoke College, 1846, I returned to Washington and opened a school called the Judea Female Seminary in my parents' home on the Green. We soon became recognized for providing quality and diversified education, emphasizing strong ethics, social responsibility, and healthy living. Why, I remember my battles with Reverend Gordon Hayes over what he called the comportment of my girls. He was aghast that we taught calisthenics in the rear yard of the school. He thought it sinful that we taught dance as a way of expression, and on one occasion, during small theatrical performance, he denounced me vigorously and strongly in the pulpit of the Congregational church. As it turns out, it was he who had to back down, not our school, and he ended up leaving town. If you were in the Wickham room of the Gunn Memorial Library tonight, you would see my beautiful memorial created by my students in 1908. It is dedicated, greatly beloved, and rarely gifted. A true inspiration to her former pupils and friends, a charming personality, and a noble woman. This gives me much happiness and pride. Thank you for listening to my story, and enjoy the rest of the tour.
Welcome, friends. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is William Hamilton Gibson. I wasn't born here in Washington, but I was born in Sandy Hook in 1850. Now, as a young man, I was so infatuated with nature that I drew my own pictures and made my own books. And then as a teenager, I was lucky enough to go to the gunnery school. And when I attended there, my grades really weren't the greatest because I was busy staring out the window and trying to enjoy nature. But I was lucky enough to have the teachers recognize that I had some real talent in this regard. Like writing and illustrating, they really did well for me to help me in that field. So when I graduated the gunnery, I moved to the city and I studied entomology and botany. And with that knowledge, I was able to turn myself into quite a well-known illustrator writer. A lot of my images and writings appeared in Scribner's Monthly and Harper's Weekly. But I think here in Washington, I'm best known for the illustrations and writings I did in the biography of Frederick Gunn. It was called The Master of the Gunnery, and it was about Frederick Gunn, the founder of the gunnery and the Memorial Library here in town. So now that I've shared with you my love of nature and illustrating, I want to tell you about a unique quality that I have. If you didn't notice already, I attract birds. They land on me when I go outside. They, for some reason, know I'm not going to hurt them and that we can communicate on some level. And strangely enough, my son inherited this trait as well. And his wife was really jealous of him and would stand next to him with hands full of seed, but the birds wouldn't land on her. So, you know, I lived up here. I had a beautiful house up here in Washington called the Sumacs that was designed by Eric Rossiter. But I really didn't have a lot of time to enjoy it as I perished at 46 years of age. But I was so beloved that they made a monument in my honor right here on Green Hill, Route 47. So next time you're coming by the cemetery here, look up. It's hard to see, it's a bit overgrown, which kind of saddens me, but take the time to check out my monument. It's really a beautiful thing. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the tour.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're staring at the spirit of a woman who attended college, graduate school, and later became a volunteer in a major war. Not so impressive until I tell you I was born in 1883. Good evening. My name is Laura Colton Hickox. Laura, that's a name my mother gave me to commemorate her sister who died when she was just 5 years old. Colton, well, that's mother's family name, and it's often the name she gives as a second name because it traces back to the Revolutionary War. And Hickox, well, we're an old family in these parts. And if you look around the cemetery here, you'll see quite a few of our headstones. In Washington, Connecticut, our families go back to 1800, so you'll be surprised to hear that my sisters and I grew up in Toledo, Ohio. Toledo, why? Well, my grandfather, he was the pastor.
Start again.
Okay. My grandfather was a pastor for 40 years, 10 of which were at the Congregational Church on the Green across the way, before my time. Now, as I was saying, I went to college. How did I choose Vassar? Well, Yale is a tradition among the men in my family, and Vassar is considered the women's equivalent of a Yale education, at least in my day. I majored in dramatic arts, and I had the privilege of becoming the leader of our mandolin and guitar club. They were wildly popular in my day. Ooh, that's me, giving the A sound to 30 girls who will tune their instruments. I played the guitar. I spent my summers here in Washington, Connecticut with Aunt Ada. That's Mrs. William Brinsmade to you all, and she lived very close to the Green. After graduation, I returned to my hometown and I became a high school teacher. You could get married or you could work, and I decided to work. It wasn't long before I returned east, and I taught high school in New York City and returned to earn my degree, a master's indeed, a master's of fine arts from Columbia University in 1914. That very same year, my girls and I had the honor of participating in Shakespeare's 200th anniversary celebration of his birthday. I hear he's on 300 or so now. Shortly thereafter, it's when the life-changing moment happened in my life. America entered the Great War, and I wanted to do something for my country, but I'm a woman, what could I do? At the time, the YMCA was actively involved in recruiting civilian American men and women for service abroad, entertaining the boys, bolstering their morale. So I decided to join their entertainment division. I thought it would be a noble thing to do. I could entertain the soldiers with singing, comedy, and theater productions. Well, once I was in France, I found that I was ill-prepared for the position. Some of the soldiers in our audience stared blankly at the walls, jumped at the slightest loud noise. We traveled through towns that had been shelled and burned to the ground, and saw the French children search the fields and the streets for food and any usable items left behind. Often we were close enough to the fighting to hear the shriek of the shells overhead, and the ground shook as they exploded. Would the next one fall on us? I had to use my acting skills to hide this fear and grief. When the war was almost over, I left Marseille aboard the U.S. Woodrow Wilson with 112 of my fellow YMCA volunteers, only 6 of which were women. 3 weeks later, I arrived in New York City. I was changed, but I returned to teaching in New York City and then Los Angeles. I died in November 1929. That was 11 years after the armistice was signed, 10 years after Prohibition began, and women got the right to vote, and only 1 month after the great stock market crash of 1929. My mother and sister were by my side, as they are here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, pray for peace, and enjoy your visit with the rest of the spirits.
In the spring of 1905, more than 1,000 people from across the country came to Washington Depot on special trains. They came to this very site to mourn. They came to mourn my passing. I had just lost a long bout with pneumonia. I am Orville Hitchcock Platt, and I was born right here in Washington, Connecticut, and my farmer was an abolitionist farmer. Our house on Wickham Road was a stop on the Underground Railroad as slaves continued north to gain their freedom. I was born July 19th, 1827, and I was schooled right here at the gunnery. I later grew up and graduated from Yale Law School. I also attended the very first law school in America, the Litchfield, Connecticut Law School. Apparently the building is still standing today, or so they tell me. Once I began practicing my law, I moved to Meriden, Connecticut. And there I was elected to be a United States Senator. I was a senator in Washington, D.C. for 26 years, or until my passing. However, at that time, I became a confidant and a very close friend with President Teddy Roosevelt. Well, he once said about me, he is one of our greatest mature spokesmen. Well, I was delighted, but I was also working with 4 other powerful and conservative senators. And when I was in the Senate, I proposed the controversial Platt Amendment. It mapped out how America withdrew from Cuba after the Spanish-American War. And my amendment was still followed until 1934. Now, as I look back on my younger days, I was a student teacher with Frederick Gunn. However, at that time, there was a controversy in town with a local minister. It was the Reverend Gordon Hayes. Apparently, Gordon Hayes decided that the Bible still justified slavery. Well, Frederick Gunn and I decided to just leave town and go to Towanda, Pennsylvania to teach. Well, over time, we both returned to our beloved Washington, Connecticut, and I eventually became the very first president of the board of the Gunn Library. There is a beautiful bronze and alabaster plaque in that library dedicated to my life. Now, if you look over here, buried with me is my wife, Jeannie. She was the daughter of Senator Truman Smith, and she was also fundamental in creating the Gunn Museum. However, I'll let her tell you more about our life here in Washington, Connecticut later on. Now, finally, let me just say, it has been a pleasure to have been, and a real honor to have been your senator for so many years, and it was really a privilege to be able to speak to all of you tonight. Thank you for coming. Safe travels, and a fond good night.
Welcome. Good evening. My name is Jeannie Smith Platt. I was born, the daughter of Senator Truman Smith, born in 1834. I became the first director of the Gunn Museum, where you began your tour this evening. I'd like to think that my husband's name would have been on the museum, but like everything else here on the green, it's the Gunn name that is on my museum. Also, we're into the Indian Museum, and we donated our collection of Indian artifacts, first to the Gunn Museum and then to the Indian Museum down the way. Mr. Eric Rossiter designed a home for us. He was a good friend at 16 Kirby Road, Kirby Corners as it was once called. I believe it's still standing. My husband was a man of integrity, and he accompanied a fellow congressman, Joseph Hawley, from Washington, D.C. to Hartford for his funeral. In the cold air of the spring, he caught a fever and died as a result. Many of his colleagues and congressmen traveled to Hartford for his funeral, and he was buried here some 118 years ago. He was a man of two Washingtons. Thank you and have a good night.
Hello everyone, my name is Benjamin Floy. I was born here in Washington, went to school at the gunnery. I didn't graduate, I wasn't a very good student, and in 1898 I enlisted in the Army. I was too young to enlist, so I enlisted under my brother William's name. I was crazy about flying and felt strongly that air power would be crucial in serving the military with air attacks and reconnaissance. I wrote a thesis about it, and it came to the attention of the U.S. War Department. They were so impressed by it, in fact, that they ordered me to Washington, D.C. in 1908 to serve for aviation duty. I actually learned to fly with the Wright brothers, and I was flying with them in 1909 for their flight test for the military. We flew at a speed of 42 miles per hour. What an exciting time that was. In March of 1910, I made the first successful military flight from Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. And the following year, I became the first man to fly for 100 miles non-stop. That may not seem like much to you folks now, but consider the planes that we were flying back then. Those double-winged machines don't compare much with your modern F-15. In 1916, I flew a combat mission into Mexico against that bandit Pancho Villa, and I sure scared the pants off of him when I went in for a low dive over his troops. You should have seen them scatter like a bunch of sheep. When America went into the Great War in 1917, General Pershing decided to appoint me Chief of Air Service for the American Expeditionary Force, which meant I was in charge of starting the U.S. Air Force. I won't go on about all my awards, achievements, and promotions, but I will tell you that air power was crucial to the Allies winning the Great War. And this young man from Washington that didn't finish high school became a Major General of the U.S. Army Air Corps. I dedicated my life to flying. I was the founding father of the United States Air Force. In fact, in my lifetime, I saw the flight in this country go from the Wright brothers to the Apollo space missions. Thank you for your time. Good day.